A few months ago, my mom had a garage sale, which meant her sons were having a garage sale as she needed us to do the heavy lifting. But that's what good sons do, and we set things up for her. But each of us realized it was a good time for us to unload some stuff too. So I went through my comic book boxes and looked to see what I could unload upon the unwary, and it turned into a bittersweet trip down the proverbial memory lane as I came across comics spanning about 40 years of my life. Looking at this stuff made me wonder what the heck had happened. Why, I could look at this stuff fondly, but barely remember what I had bought last month. I don't buy as much DC, and I stopped buying Marvel altogether, and these days products published by the independents don't really interest me. I could go on a rant about how this came to be, but so many people online have written blogs and published videos discussing it at length, and if someone wants to ask, I'll be more than happy to discuss when and why things soured for me. But that's not the purpose of the videos I want to make. Nope. I thought instead that rather complain about the comics being published today, I would primarily take a look back at the comics of yesterday, to examine stories and runs, and talk about why they stuck in my mind so. And yeah, I'll find myself doing a comparison and contrast of modern works and trends. Now bear in mind, I'm not looking to assassinate the character of any writer or artist based on their asinine behavior today. I want to focus on the positive. Mostly. That decision is not a slight against critics who do that sort of thing for a living. I happen to enjoy a lot of those videos, and I'm a subscriber to some of their channels. So without further ado, let's begin. Back in the day, you had a lot of sources for comics. There was the reliable comic book store, but there was also the supermarket, your 7-Eleven, your bookstores. The idea of a direct market comic was pretty foreign because common wisdom said you wanted to make sure your product reached as many people as possible. Then came Camelot 3000. Now up front, I'm going to be honest here and say I don't own the original run of Camelot 3000. Back then, I could be a cheap bastard and sometimes I'd read my friend's copies when he's bought it. However, I do own the trade paperback, but rather than cut off the spine and scan the pages, I'm going to instead cheat and use pics I found online. That being said, let's get into it. Camelot 3000 was written by Mike W. Barr and illustrated by Brian Boland. It was a 12-issue maxi series that ran from 1982 to 1985. Yes, 12 issues released over 3 years. It was a series that had a few problems production-wise, among them being Boland was British and lived in Great Britain, and back then digital publishing was non-existent, so shipping finished work overseas could cause delays as well as create complications regarding the collaborative process between artist and writer. If you look at Boland's work as well, you can see just how magnificent it is. That magnificence takes time, people. Me? I didn't know anything about production issues. To my ignorant teenage mind, I had assumed all the writers and artists lived a few miles away from one another, or all worked in the same building or something. In the days before Twitter and Facebook, the only way you knew what was going on was if the comic company told you in a letters column or in an interview in a magazine. When that happened, stuff usually had to get by an editor. As you can well understand, some comic creators came across a lot less like ignorant assholes back then. I miss those times. Camelot 3000 was also DC Comics' first maxi series, predating their epic Crisis on Infinite Earths. It was also one of the first direct market projects, so you couldn't just pick this up at a 7-Eleven. No, you had to know where your local comic book store was to pick up this masterpiece. Finally, it was the first comic to ever be printed on Baxter paper and not newsprint, and I'll be honest, while the paper does help to make the art pop, it also contributed to the larger price tag. $1 was a lot of money back then for a comic. Crazy, I know, what with most comics being $3.99 today. In retrospect, if it was up to me, I'd go back to newsprint. Anything to bring the cost of comics down. The plot of Camelot 3000 is that in the far, far future, Earth is invaded by aliens who are decimating planet Earth. A young archaeology student named Tom Prentice comes across the grave of King Arthur, who as legend has it shall return when England most needs him. Arthur rises and proceeds to retrieve his magic blade Excalibur, find his old mentor Merlin, and track down Queen Guinevere, Lancelot, and the other Knights of the Round Table who have been reincarnated. Together they must face off against Mordred, Arthur's bastard son, and the sorceress Morgan Le Fay, the true power behind the alien invasion. First of all, the comic in some ways does come across as a bit dated and maybe even a little racially insensitive. For example, Galahad is reincarnated into a Japanese body, and naturally he's a samurai because, everybody from Japan wields samurai swords. That being said, though, and there are spoilers, aplenty in this, the African guy actually survives the story, so Bard does avoid what has become a sadly common trope of the black guy always dying. Personally, I try my best not to judge movies, television shows, and books by today's standards, and instead do my best to take into account when they were produced. This is a fantastic tale full of old-school adventure. It contains a ton of excitement brought to life by Brian Boland's utterly stunning artwork. Boland is an artist who is not only able to craft a well-illustrated action sequence, he is also able to effectively convey emotion through facial expression, body language. You get the full gamut of emotions when you look at characters in a Boland tale, from fear to sorrow and anger, as well as joy. And believe me, looking at Boland's art is a joy in itself. Mike Barr delivers an amazing old-school tale of heroism, but it isn't just some flat by-the-numbers plot. Along the way, we have betrayal, one of the oldest and most heartbreaking love triangles ever told, as well as what was for the time one of the most mind-blowing plot lines I had ever seen in comics, Tristan being reincarnated into a woman's body and the angst she goes through. Tristan has the most fascinating story arc in the comic. Starting off as a man in ancient times, he is reincarnated into the body of a woman and frankly hates it. This leads her to leaving her husband to be at the altar, and even going so far as almost betraying Arthur for Morgan's promise to give her her old body back. You might be saying, but Tom, it's the future. Why doesn't she just get a sex change? Well, talk to Mike Barr about that. But part of the problem isn't just Tristan being a woman, it's that she is markedly weaker than what she was. Tristan had been a knight, the optimal physical specimen of his age, and if she is going to be a man again, she wants to be the ultimate man, to regain what she had lost. Part of that isn't just for herself. It's also because Isehold, her lover of old, has been reincarnated into the body of a woman, and she wants to renew their past relationship the way it had once been. There's also the story of Tom Prentice being in love with Tristan, and her former husband-to-be being unable to let her go. Everybody wants Tristan. Does Prentice come across as a bit too strong at times? I don't think so. He's a man in love, and in the end when Tristan tells him no, he accepts it. His heart is just a bit broken, but he moves on. All in all, that part of the story is handled in a pretty mature and believable manner. Prentice never comes across like a creepy stalker, just a man who needs to give a reincarnated man stuck in a woman's body a little space. Comics. Am I right? In the end, Isehold convinces Tristan that love exists beyond the physical. Barr tackling issues like gender identity was pretty groundbreaking at the time, and I thought he handled it in a pretty mature manner. If it seems like I'm focusing too much on this part of the story, I guess it's because one of the modern complaints from some quarters is that many readers hate this sort of stuff in modern comics. I don't think people hate the subject matter of sexual identity, simply how it's presented. These days there's no exploration of the theme, no subtlety involved. It's in your face, and if you have a problem with it, you're anti-LGBT plus sign. Amazing how Barr and Boland do a credible job handling a very touchy subject back in the early to mid-80s. A story like this only works if you have a proper set of villains, and Barr and Boland present us with an interesting array. From the weak-willed Kay, to Tristan's jilted husband, the war hero Sergeant Owen McAllister, to Mordred, who actually has a legitimate grievance, to the horrific Nimue, to Morgan Le Fay, who is deliciously wicked, to the aliens who are pawns in this dreadful conflict. The creators could have simply given us a paint-by-numbers retelling of Arthur's legend, and the use of old villains as well as the quest for the Grail to lend to that, but Barr and Boland add enough twist to make this tale fresh. Now one might say, Tom, how is Arthur able to function in a far-future setting? Well, again, Barr handles that rather well, too, in that Arthur doesn't understand science. He only knows that it isn't magic and that there are rules on how it operates. Ask your average person how an internal combustion engine works, and then tell them they can't look up the answer on their smartphone, a device they probably barely comprehend. We exist in a world where we take technology for granted, and Arthur simply rolls with it. A good example of this in another medium is Jamie McCrimmon in Doctor Who, a Scots from the 18th century who travels with the Second Doctor and who handles the weird and fantastic in stride, trusting his companion to explain what's what and who needs punching. If I have any issues with Arthur's portrayal, perhaps it's his outfit, which looks a little too, well, super heroic. I would like to have seen a little less Technicolor, at least when he first rises from the grave. It's also a little bit annoying how all the other knights get kitted out in clothes and armor that are both unique and functional, and Guinevere, who has been reincarnated into a high-ranking military commander, gets the figure skater outfit. But you know what? When I start nitpicking little things like this, I know it's time to wrap up the review. Camelot 3000 is still available on Amazon, so if you're looking for something new to read, I suggest you pick it up. If you enjoyed the video or see some room for improvement, please tell me so in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe as well. Peace out.